If you're enjoying haunted UK fiction, please consider supporting the show on Patreon or Ko-fi. Simply search for Haunted UK Podcast. Her mum had been right. It was cold. She worked her fingertips into the ice, appreciating the smoothness of the whale's skin. The longer she held her hand there, the damper her palm became. She could even feel the water seeping into the edge of her sleeve. The guilt struck her like a sledgehammer. There shouldn't be that much water, surely. Was the sculpture even there anymore? She must have single-handedly melted it. Hello and welcome, dear listeners, to Haunted UK Fiction, a sister podcast to The Haunted UK, which features original flash fiction, short stories and novellas with paranormal themes. All stories you will hear were written by a collection of talented writers, authors and storytellers, both independent and professional. In today's episode, we'll be reading Deathly Cold, which was sent in to us by Harrie Tabor. Harrie is, in her words, finally getting her act together and actually writing some stories, instead of just daydreaming about writing some stories. She loves the look of stained glass and thinks fancy rats are extremely underrated as pets. Now, get comfortable, grab a little something to sip on, perhaps cuddle up under a blanket to help offset the chills coming your way, and let's dive into the story. It was heavier than she'd anticipated. Nevertheless, Katia managed to work the tip of her boot under the stone's edge and bit by bit shuffled it to the side of the road. Her persistence drew looks. People appraised her as they drifted by, taking her in and dismissing her from their thoughts in a matter of milliseconds. One woman clad in a white gilet with red spots even stared unabashedly at her from across the street. She supposed it was fair enough. The middle of the road wasn't typically a good place to mess about. It was no wonder she was attracting attention, but it was safe enough since there weren't any cars. The road was blocked off, presumably for the fair. "Aren't you done messing about yet?" Her mum was shifting from foot to foot, with her arms crossed so tightly it appeared as though she was trying to absorb them into her chest. Both of them were wrapped up warm, but winter somehow finds a way to chill the bones regardless of how many layers you're wearing. "Do you not remember the trouble I had in April? If someone had done this for me, I would have saved a fortune. If a car hits it, I know, just hurry up please, I'm freezing." "We're going to be outside all day." She resigned herself to a job well done, instead of perfectly done, then caught up with her mum, "Which is why I want to get moving." Katia checked the map. Their first destination was 2 minutes away, and all they needed to do was carry straight on. So she slid her phone back into her pocket to avoid wasting the battery. Besides, the crowds were making her antsy. Admittedly, they were probably all like her, here for the day, just to enjoy the event. But it'd be so easy for someone to dart up, snatch her phone, and fade away into the sea of faces. And then where would she be? Without her train tickets for one thing. When they reached the shop, it only took opening the door an inch for the warmth inside to lure them in. They put up no resistance. The interior was a tourist's dream. Magnets lined the walls, racks of postcards dotted the room, ready to spin at a touch of a hand, and T-shirts folded on tables boasted local scenes. At the desk, a man and a woman were deep in conversation, their furrowed brows at odds with the sea of smiles on the cobblestones outside. "Is it clear now?" the man was asking. "Yes, but that's not the issue, is it? The whole thing's a mess. They were noticed. "Oh, hello. Are you here for a map?" Katya's mum took the lead. "Yes, please. That'd be great." The woman peeled a leaflet from the counter and proffered it. "All the information you need is in here. It's got all the shops, information about each one, and even some places to grab something to eat and drink if you get a bit peckish." They both said their thanks, then ducked back outside. "Are we ready?" Despite herself, despite her grown-up age, her grown-up job, and her grown-up flat, Katya felt those stirrings inside, the same ones she used to feel every Christmas Eve as a child, the ones that heralded something magical. They unfolded the map and began to work out where stop number 1 was located. As it transpired, they were only a couple of streets away, so they dived back into the crowd and followed its natural flow to the first of the sculptures. She hadn't been sure what to expect. Ice wasn't marble, but the sculpture was nothing short of magnificent. It lounged in front of a local museum, already swamped by hordes of people, being captured over and over again by cameras and mobile phones. Katya and her mum managed to find someone suitably short to peer over the shoulders of, then took their turn to appreciate the work of art before them. The ice had been carved to an improbable level of detail. The block was human-sized and had been cut into the shape of a rugged mountain range, complete with snowy peaks wrapped in a host of clouds and a glassy lake at its base. "Adventure," her mum said. Prompted by Katya's raised eyebrows, she elaborated. "That's the theme, adventure. That's what the map says." They stood there for a while longer, drinking in the detail until all the faces they'd been surrounded with when they'd arrived had been replaced by new ones. "Ready to go?" Katya nodded in response, and the pair weaved their way out of the gaggle of people in the direction of stop number 2. The second sculpture was in a nearby alleyway. The houses lining the sides leaned into each other conspiratorially, doing their best to block out the meagre winter sun. For whatever reason, there was no crowd here. They weren't alone, though. 3 other people milled about, already enjoying the sculpture. "What is it?" her mum finally asked, after they'd been there for over 2 minutes. "It's a belt. Look, there's a sword hanging from it on that side and a rope on the other, which are doubling as legs to hold it up. And then there's a key, a bag of coins and a buckle, all in between. I don't know what that thing is, though." "Are you sure it's a belt?" Let me look at the map." Katya couldn't hold back an indignant chuckle. "It's a belt, I'm telling you." Her mum had finally opened the map. "Go on, am I right?" "I couldn't possibly say," her mum responded, robbing Katya of the chance to say, "I told you so. I don't like this one as much. Shall we move on now?" "Fine." The route to the third sculpture took them down a charming lane of shops. Bay windows held lavish displays, showcasing the best of the products on offer. Sumptuous bags rested on swathes of velvet. Towers of painted chocolates, speckled with a rainbow of colours, were piled high, next to similarly stacked macarons, and mannequins glared down at them, decked in clothes Katya suspected would have eye-watering price tags. The sculpture was waiting for them between 2 benches, next to a planter of winter pansies. On that city centre street, hours away from the nearest seaside, a large whale faced them head-on, bursting out of a massive wave. In the water adjacent to its curving tail, a small ship teetered precariously, knocked off course by the sheer force of the whale's emergence. There's something within most humans, some primal instinct, that begins to clamour whenever it spots an animal both real and otherwise. The whale had become a victim of this instinct, Katya saw, as hand after hand petted the top of its head, stroked its back, and rubbed its chin. So far, the ice hadn't suffered for it. It was still as well defined as when it had been put there. It was tempting. Katia wrestled with the choice. She knew she shouldn't touch the sculpture. It was there to admire, not to interact with. And surely, even if it wasn't evident at the moment, the almost constant body contact would be warming the ice up, making it melt even quicker. Her internal dialogue was interrupted by her mum slapping a palm onto the whale's side. "It's cold," she observed, as though this was an important revelation. Katia gave in, prized her right glove off, and followed suit. Her mum had been right. It was cold. She worked her fingertips into the ice, appreciating the smoothness of the whale's skin. The longer she held her hand there, the damper her palm became. She could even feel the water seeping into the edge of her sleeve. The guilt struck her like a sledgehammer. There shouldn't be that much water, surely. Was the sculpture even there anymore? She must have single-handedly melted it. She snatched her hand away and started to assess how much damage she'd done, convinced that she'd find a hand-shaped dent in the ice's otherwise pristine surface. And she did. But that wasn't the worst part. The handprint was completely red. Her heart caught in her throat, and she stumbled backwards, knocking into the people behind her, prompting a chorus of grumbles. She remembered her hands, remembered how slick they were, and raised them up. Her skin, flushed pink with the cold anyway, was sticky with scarlet. It had burrowed under her nails, matted the fleece lining of her coat, and she even felt tiny beads trickling down the length of her sleeve. She only realized she was screaming when her mum started shaking her by the shoulders. "Katia! Katia, what's wrong?" "My hands!" she sobbed. "The blood, it—" She stopped mid-sentence. Even the tears stayed where they were, glistening in the corners of her eyes instead of rolling down her cheeks. Her hands were clean again. They weren't even wet. She managed to drag her gaze over to the sculpture. There was nothing wrong with it. There was no handprint. There wasn't even a dent. "What blood? Have you cut yourself? I can't see anything." Her mum's hands were holding hers, turning them over, searching for the source of her unhappiness. "No, I don't know. There was—" "Come on." Her mum coaxed her away from the staring crowd over to a different bench, further down the road. They sat there for what must have been 10 minutes, Katia's head resting on her mum's shoulder. "How are you feeling now?" her mum asked, gently squeezing her. "Better, thank you," Katia answered. "I don't know what happened. I thought— It doesn't matter." "What do you want to do? We could go home if you— No, let's go to the next one. I'm just being silly." "If you're sure." They dug out the map, pinpointed stop number 4, and headed over. From a distance, the sculpture was fine. It was a treasure chest brimming with coins. The creator had frozen shining gold paper within the ice to bring the coins to life, and a few blue and green sheets as well for the odd jewel dotted among them. But it was the red that concerned her. It spilled over the top of the chest from small pores between the riches inside, running in rivulets down its sides, spluttering the paving slabs. Nobody else seemed to notice, not even her mum. They happily jostled for the best view, the red smearing into the soles of their shoes. Her mum ventured forward, becoming one with the crowd, but all Katia could do was to stay where she was, staring in horror. "Macabre, isn't it?" The voice came from her left. It was a woman speaking, bundled up in a dark coat, with navy gloves and a scarf so voluptuous it seemed to be made of more fabric than Katia's entire outfit. "You can see it too?" Katia's voice was a little more than a whisper. "See what, honey?" "I was just saying it's macabre. Them still running the event after what happened? The show must go on, it seems." Katia frowned. "What do you—" But an arm found hers, and she was being dragged away down the street. "Ready for the next one?" Her mum was beaming, seemingly oblivious to her daughter's distress. They emerged onto a different street, and Katya recognised it as the place where she'd moved the stone earlier. Something had changed, though, beside the road no longer being blocked off. At first, she thought they were posters. It made her recall going somewhere on a train last year or the year before. She couldn't remember exactly where it had been, but posters had been stuck to every surface available. Lampposts, the church fence, bins, advertising a number of events for the town's student population. Until she took a closer look, she assumed the same type of thing was happening here. It was the name that made her realise. The same name on each piece of paper. On a few posters, the same smiling face accompanied the name. Someone had died. Note after note expressed condolences, sympathies, love, thanks. It seemed she'd been one of the sculptors, and had been dropping off a couple for the trail when her van had crashed into a wall. It dawned on Katya that the stone she'd moved must have been from that same wall. It must have skittered so far down the road that it had been missed when the accident was being cleaned up. It was such a pointless loss of life, she felt. The photos showed a woman with a lovely smile and... Wait. She knew that face. Why did she know that face? And then it clicked. Slowly, oh so slowly, she looked over to where she'd seen the staring woman earlier. She was there even now, wearing that same white gilet, still covered in the red spots Katya finally recognized as blood. "Don't move. Please don't move," Katya muttered to herself, repeating the words over and over. It worked for a while. While her mother rifled through the sympathetic notes, Katya's eyes were locked on the woman's, both of them stiller than the windless sky above. Then the woman took a step in Katya's direction. Then another. And another. With each step, something changed. It started with a small graze, no bigger than a grape, appearing on a woman's left cheek. After that, a cut, running along the bridge of her nose. By the time the woman's shoulder had shifted, now clearly dislocated, Katya was already running. She could hear her mother's voice calling her name, but she carried on down the street, regardless, until she was forced to slow down by the sheer amount of bodies in her way. She tried to pick up the pace, tried to run again, but there were just too many people. A glimmer caught her eye, and she realized the reason for the crowd. There was another ice sculpture. She began to duck and dodge, making her way forward with her tongue clamped between her teeth to stop the vile words that threatened to spill out of her whenever someone wandered into her path. She reached a break in the throng, a tiny gap that had been left for the sculpture. She had fully intended to keep moving, to keep pushing and shoving her way out, but when she saw the sculpture, saw what it was, she froze in place. It was a busy road. Cars, vans and lorries of ice all started to vibrate, and this time, Katya wasn't the only one to notice. The tremors built and built, sending tiny cracks racing through the sculpture to a soundtrack of anxious murmurs, and Katya remembered she'd been running. She'd been running from... An icy hand closed around hers. The sculpture came apart, shards of ice splintering the crowd, and the sheer force knocked those nearest to the ground, including Katya. There was gravel lodged in her cheek, and her ankle had twisted, but she didn't feel it. What she felt was something else. It was as though her skin had been ripped off, exposing the muscle underneath, only for chunks of ice to be shoved on in place of her flesh. It was a coldness that went beyond the surface, to the very heart of her, and it held her in place, pinned her against the gravel. She was aware of voices, could even pick out her name from the buzz of worried questions and answering moans, but the bulk of her attention was with the woman whose forehead was pressing against hers, who was back to being so very still. Those eyes were completely dead now. There was no life left in them to stare with. Shoots of glass sprouted from any patch of bare skin, and the gilet was soaked now, more red than white. They laid there, frozen together, until arms prized them apart and lifted Katya away. It was only when the ambulance doors shut with a slam and her view of the woman who no one else could see was cut off for good that she registered the knife of ice lodged in her chest. The cold finally loosened its grip, letting the pain flood in, and Katya began to scream. We truly hope you've enjoyed this quite literally bone-chilling story from Harrie Tabor. If you would like to hear more from Harrie, stay tuned as we have more of her stories to share, or get in touch with them using the contact information found in the show's notes. If you have an original story that would send a chill down our spines and you would like to submit it for review, simply send it in to hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. That's hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com. Until next time, stay safe and take care.